I'm Jamie from Zennor Made. I'm a woodturner and I do lots of other things with wood as well. Primarily woodturning. Zennor Made, so my middle name is Jamie Zennor. And that's sort of where the Zennor Made came from. I'm not actually in Zennor. A lot of people think I am, pronouncing my name. So I grew up in a very creative atmosphere, sort of a house full of creative people. My mum, my dad, brother, my sister. My parents are both teachers, but very creative outside of that as well. And yeah, growing up, I was just always surrounded by things going on. My brother was always fixing something, making something, and he was a bit older than me. And yeah, over the years, I started to just pick things up and do it myself. And then when I was at secondary school, first lesson of woodwork in the DT rooms, I was hooked. And we were really lucky. We were able to do lunch times and after school clubs there in the DT rooms. And throughout the years, I was just in there more and more and more and more, every lunchtime through GCSE. And I loved it. It couldn't get me out of there. And we were allowed to have a go on the lathe under very strict instructions and sort of being almost having hands held whilst we were doing it at first. And as soon as you kind of got the basics, you were left to sort of go with it. And I learned on a union graduate, which is what I use all day, every day now. When I had the opportunity to buy one, I did, because it's quite a special lathe to me, really. The first bowl I ever made was on one of them, and they're renowned for being a great bit of kit. You can't buy a lathe like that anymore. And had a really good teacher as well, who, Tim Tall, he was a legend. Still around, I still have a drink with him now. And he taught me pretty much everything I knew when I started Zennor Made, probably 15 years later. After school, I never really did anything in the middle. And yeah, when I had the opportunity to actually start working for myself and building this business, I sort of fell back to school for a bit and back to that way of working, and then just finding my own way with it, really. So I started Zennor Made probably 2016. I was working in an office, paying the bills, and not feeling great I was feeling great, but I sort of felt like something wasn't quite right. I wasn't being creative, and I needed that. So when I moved here, I had the opportunity to put this workshop together. And I started with that tiny little lathe there and just doing it at a hobby level, but with always the intention of maybe I could chase that dream that I've always had when I was a teenager and never really fulfilled. And then, yeah, I started putting it together, and I was sat thinking I'd started making some pieces, and I was quite proud of them. And I was like, oh, okay, I can still do this. And I can make things that other people find hard to make. And then I wanted to start and sign my work in some way. And because of the range of different things I started to make, I was like, well, I kind of need to create a brand if I'm going to start and sell this. So then I had to think of a name for the brand, and I was like, oh yeah, my mum and dad gave me that name. It's really cool. So I might have been teased a little bit with it, but now it's probably going to be quite useful. And suddenly Zennor Made was just ding. And I was like, right, we'll call it that, because I'm called that.
Yeah.
And then, and then I just sort of built it from there. And basically as things started to sell, I started up an Etsy shop and got really amazing response, started up my Instagram, Facebook and all of that, and people were like, oh wow, this is amazing. And then people started contacting me going, can you make this for us? Can you do this for us? And we've got a wedding coming, we want to get our family a really special present. And suddenly there was a real opening in the market there, and I was like, oh, okay. And because of the way I work with the wood, it's all locally sourced within reason. A lot of it I source myself, with my own hands, pick it up off the ground, and someone will phone me saying a tree's fallen down, do you want it? Or a tree's coming down, do you want it? And I'll grab it from as far as 100 meters out the road recently. and because of that local connection to the woods, being in Cornwall, a lot of Cornish families, they're very proud of it. We're quite patriotic as Cornish people, and having a piece of Cornish wood and then being able to vouch for that history of it as a present to someone can be really special, especially if it's from their own town. I've had people that have come for a wedding gift and they're from Stivians, and I've got cherry from Stivians. It's like, oh, cherry's my favourite wood, actually. Yeah, and so it always works really well because you've got that nice local connection and it's quite personal. Making sort of live edge bowls is something I really love doing. I really like the natural shape that they create from the tree itself, because it shows off loads of parts of the tree nicely, and people respond really well to them. They love the look and the feel of them as well. But anything unusual, I like finding the unusual pieces of wood that could be more of a challenge, and then seeing what will end up evolving from that. And sometimes I'll go at it and I'll see a live edge bowl and I'll be like, right, I'll get that out of it. And it might be slightly more open or closed than I initially anticipated because of the knot in the wood or whatever, but then sometimes I will start something and something completely different will come out of it, and I had no idea. And they're often the most amazing pieces. So yeah, it's a bit of an unknown often when I pick it up what it's going to turn into. It would depend on what the job is, I guess. If I've got a commission, it can often be led by size of the piece, the shape of the piece, or what kind of wood the customer's sort of after, or what kind of aesthetic the customer's after from the wood. They often don't specify the wood. They ask me to find a piece that will have that look that they're after. And because of the nature of the pieces I make, they often have those characterful features, and so they trust me to find that for them. But then on the flip side, if I'm making stuff, I guess for myself, to then offer to sale, to then offer for sale, those pieces, kind of the piece of wood when I get it in its raw form dictates what my mind sees, but I don't draw it. I very rarely draw anything down. It's sort of in here. I've got a rough idea of the shapes and the curves or not curves, the straight bits, if it's got them. Not many, very often. And then I'll just start working with it in whichever way, be that on the lathe or carving it or whatever it is. Often starts with a chainsaw, which is quite brutal. Obviously, a lot of people that work with wood all day will know that oak's got a fairly generic grain. You'll get variations through different species and the type of saw cut that it's had on it. So obviously you've got that knowledge that's kind of inbuilt into woodworkers in general. That applies to all wood essentially. But then when you're working with wood that's sort of fallen on the ground and it could have been there a week, it could have been there 6 years, there's an element of nature taking its course, and you've got all the rot that starts to happen and the funguses. They create amazing colours and patterns in the wood, but they will remove the strength from the wood. So there's a certain point where it goes too far. So I'll often look for pieces that are sort of on the turn, because they will have more colour and more features in. Structurally, they're useless because you couldn't use it in construction, or you wouldn't necessarily choose that piece of wood for a piece of cabinet making, because you'd have to impregnate it with resin to get it stable enough. But from making a decorative bowl or a vase or sculpture, you can afford to have that delicateness to it, because it's not going to get things chucked around on it all the time. It will quite often get placed on a mantelpiece as a piece of art, and as a result, I'll kind of see the signs that tell me that there's going to be colour in there that wouldn't normally be. Or, the classic for woodturners is if you see a tree with burr on it, big warty burr, that's going to be gold dust. That's like the unicorn. You're looking for that, because the grain is so intricate. Every time I make a beautiful piece out of burr, it's sold before I've even listed it. I get people messaging me when they see the video going out on Instagram, is that one for sale? Because it's such stunning wood. It looks like the surface of a planet that's for the moon, but with loads of colour. It's amazing. Yeah, I often do. So I've got friends that are tree surgeons, and obviously I sometimes get offered a tree because a house is being built or something and it's got to be cut down. And when I first get that wood, it's usually green, and I'll work with that tree. So yeah, with the green wood, so when I get the whole tree, I'll get the tree home, or it'll get dumped on my driveway by a tree surgeon. I'll often grab a piece straight away because I just get so excited. I'm like, this is brand new to me. It's like, what am I going to find? And I sort of see all these shapes in it, and I'm like, oh my goodness. And I'll grab one and I'll just stick it on the lathe really quick and just see what comes out of it. And there'll be water flying around everywhere. You're soaking wet by the end of it. And then the piece generally cracks on you that night if you haven't turned it thin enough, or if you're really lucky, you know, it might survive. But you get to see those colours and the figure and the shapes and the grain and the way it exposes itself through the tree. Not through a chainsaw cut, which doesn't tend to show it very well. And then some woods will respond really well to green wood turning, so I'll kind of plough through quite a lot of it as quickly as possible. And then you go through various different drying processes with green wood. You know, you're ideally trying to avoid getting things to crack, so a lot of the time you'll turn it very thin. So there's a bit more elasticity in the wood, and sometimes I've been turning green bits of holly, and I've gone so thin that the bowl starts to open up and become a plate on the lathe because of the centrifugal force, and it will do that on the lathe, and then as you slow it down again, it goes back because it's so thin and elastic. And when it's all wet still, it will do that. Once that wood's dry, it will just snap like a, you know, crumpled up leaf. But then you can bathe it in oil to slow that process down of it cracking, and all sorts of different ways. And a lot of the time with the green wood, it's quite experimental, and you've got to allow for an element of loss. I guess a bit like a potter would fire a load of bowls that they've made, and they might lose 10% in ones that don't make it out the kiln. It's kind of the same if you're using green wood like that for me. And then obviously the rest of the wood is dried out over time. And for example, that cherry tree, I turned some green wood pieces of that in 2017. It's far from green now. Some of it I left out in the open, and I literally let the chickens and the garden do their thing to it. And then after 2 or 3 years, some of it, 3 or 4 years, some other bits, I brought them in to one of my other stores that then wood just dries in. Sort of, it's got a little bit of airflow, so it doesn't let things get too damp in there, and it just slowly sort of cures things off a bit. And that wood then will come in here. In here, it dries out almost too dry in the summer. So I only tend to bring it in here when I know it's fully seasoned and there's not really any more drying left to do, or I'm about to work in. And then I've got a finishing room in the loft of my house because I'm a bit tight for space. I mean, I'm working on a cherry tree from Stivyns, as I mentioned earlier. That one, I picked up that tree in 2017. I'm still working with it now. I've made, if you don't include all the little key rings and spoons, I've made hundreds of numbered pieces from that tree. And if you include all the key rings and spoons, thousands of pieces from that one tree. And I've still got a few little bits left. And I will use all the tiny bits. So when I cut a big bowl, I'll cut the bowl blank out, often with a chainsaw and then on the bandsaw, and then there'll be wedges left over. And those wedges, if you cut them neatly on the bandsaw, you can have blanks to make spoons, or sometimes you'll end up with longer bits. You can turn those into blanks for key rings and cut them into little discs, and I'll try and use it all. Light pulls out of the little, often from the bowls, the corners will end up being light pulls, and I'll sell those just for your bathroom light. And out of all random bits of wood. And often those bits are really full of figure and features, because the whole bowl blank is a gnarly bit of wood that would have been an offcut from a lot of sawmills' perspective. All of it. There's nothing I don't love, apart from sometimes the dust can be quite nasty. I absolutely love all of it. I love the unknown, but I like guessing. So I like imagining what it's going to look like, and then it reveals itself. 99% of the time it isn't what I thought. It's often better, but it's always amazing. And yeah, I just love when I'm turning. I love as you get down in through the layers and you start unveiling all that grain and it starts to show all its shapes and colours. It's such a cathartic process. It's like meditation. It's great. I probably made about 30 or 40 pieces from that tree, and I've still got enough left of it to make that stored. The grain in it is unbelievable. It was a macrocarpa, a Monterey cypress, which could have quite easily have grown here or in the States. And because of the condition of the tree, myself and Kith both are of the opinion that it came from the States, because you want to believe that. But it had been in the sea for a very long time, and the wood had changed quite a lot because of that. And it was mostly the root ball that washed up. So I mean, the root ball you'll never see commercially available through a sawmill because it's full of bits of stone and everything anyway. And then this had then been across the Atlantic, probably further, and then washed around on Turnefno Beach for a year, getting stuck in the corner, get rocks jammed in it. People would have fires on it, and it had scorch marks from where they'd had a barbecue in it. And the grain doesn't have a direction. It's like when you see someone mixing paint, it looks like that, the grain. It's crazy. And there was one big salad bowl that I made from that. It did sell a couple of years back. I was gutted when it went. I was gutted because that piece lived in my house on show all the time. But yeah, it went to a good home and it's a stunning bowl. It was that direction of grain and ripple and shimmer, and it looked like, in my mind, a bright orange version of the inside of an oyster shell. That's probably how I would describe what, and I kind of knew that was going to be in there because there was some telltale signs on where the bark used to be, on the surface of the wood that said that figure should run through that bit. And then knowing that it's a root ball, you know that it's going to get crazy. And it looked like two pieces of wood glued together, both of which were stunning, but it wasn't, it was just one. And I haven't worked with them all, so I couldn't say for sure. But if I had to pick one that I always walk away feeling very content having made something, it would be you. And just the finish that it comes up with naturally. It's almost like it doesn't need a finish. It's got a high oil content in it naturally, and it just comes up so polished, especially turning. And I just think the grain is just stunning. It's almost like the whole tree is a bit of a root ball. You know, a lot of yew will grow straight, but you tend to find a lot of yew is really, really gnarly, and it's been for a hard life, and the grain shows that. It's full of character. I wouldn't say enjoy, but I find very humbling. I get asked on a few occasions to make urns, and I find that quite humbling because you're working in such a personal environment there, and it's quite sensitive. But generally, the customer that comes to me asking for something like that really understands my work and the way I work, and that's almost what they want. So I don't feel the pressure of, we want this urn to be exactly this shape and size and so on and so forth. It's more like, no, we want this really natural looking piece that will allow to be used as an urn. And I think I really like that because it's making something so important for somebody, but it's also allowing me to have a little bit of creative flow, kind of influenced by the wood still very much, and making something that will obviously be cherished for a very long time. I think that is a piece that would be very special to me to make for people. And then completely on the flip side, I love hearing about either something that's been made as a wedding gift or as an anniversary present. I get a lot of people asking for a nice piece of that, and it's often a big centerpiece for a table, big fruit bowl or something like that. Those are really nice because, you know, people have a big celebration with it. But every piece is special to me, even the tiny pieces. You know, every single tiny spoon that I make, it's all done by hand, it's all completely hand finished, and every single millimetre of that wood I've inspected to make sure I'm happy with before it's done. So, you know, I get a 5-star review on a salt pick spoon, and that makes me just as happy as a 5-star review on a big fruit bowl for someone, you know, or a whole dining table. It makes no difference. It's the same amount of love and thought and process into each piece. So many pieces at the same time in my head, and in the workshop. And naturally, because some things need to dry a bit longer, they can start and be half made. Yeah, I mean, some days I'll sit down and, you know, spend the whole day making spoons. So I can be sat there for 6 hours and make 30 spoons or something. But then some days I'll spend 2 or 3 days making just one piece. So it really varies. And there is no average really. It's sort of led by how the wood behaves as well. Some bits can be a lot harder than I anticipated, and they'll need twice as many cuts. So it goes from being 1 hour to nearly 2. Sometimes I win, sometimes I lose. You know, sometimes I'll quote that it's going to take me 10 hours and it'll take me 7, and I've won. But sometimes it'll take me 15 and you're stuck there. But I don't mind. That's part of the nature of the business. And I like to think it averages out. There's a patch in the roof there where the bit of the bowl that came off the lathe was going so fast it landed 20 feet at the other side of the garden. I found the bit literally way over there. I went right straight through the roof, missed my head by about an inch. So that was quite a good one. That was basically I think I had the lathe going a bit too quick for it, and it was a bit green. And as the flex started, there was a weakness in the wood that I hadn't spotted, and it just let go. After a cut, I'd obviously weakened it enough, and it just went. And by chance, obviously as it's spinning around, it could let go at any point, but it let go at the perfect moment to get maximum projection straight through the roof. I mean, bits of it hit everything. There was bits of it stuck in the wall, all sorts, but one chunk about that big went straight up through the roof and landed up there, and that was exciting. And I did have one bit, I was really bad, I didn't put my visor down. I was putting a new bit of wood on the lathe. This was early days, and I've never done this since. I pressed go on the lathe before I put my visor down, and I wasn't thinking, and I just watched the piece of wood come straight off and hit me in the face. And that hurt a lot. That drew blood, did some damage. First of all, watch a lot of woodturners and look at what they're doing, how they're doing it, and try and understand that. I had the luxury of watching a teacher, so that's very easy. And obviously there's loads of great woodturning clubs. It's called Woodturning Club in Chasewater, and those guys are really good. They've got an amazing club that you can go and learn. That's probably the best way for someone who's not woodturned before. If you're a woodturner yourself, and maybe just starting out, I would say for me, listening to the wood and the tools is what tells me what's going on, both from the feeling and the sound. And then the results on the wood tell you. Stop and look at your cuts, see what you've actually done. And when you have a good one, stop and admire it, because you'll remember what you did, and eventually muscle memory should kick in. And for me, it feels like it's just doing itself. It just flows. And I can hear when something's not right. And when I've given a few people a bit of help tuition themselves, I can be looking the other way and tell them what they're doing wrong sometimes, because I can hear how that chisel isn't cutting right. And I can think, that just needs a tiny little turn on the chisel and you'll get a nice clean cut. And it's just listening to it, basically, both tactile listening and audible listening. And that's probably the best bit of advice I can give. Other than that, just keep doing it. A lathe and a bowl gouge, a good bowl gouge. I use Henry Taylor dynamic range of gouges, and that does 90% of my turning. There's plenty of others there that are useful for other little bits, but that's the main tool that I rely on, I'd say. And that's what I'm happiest using, I think. When I've got that in my hand and there's a nice chunk of wood on there spinning, I just feel like, yeah, this is the best bit. Everything else almost starts to become a chore around it. Depends on space and environment that you can work in. If you've got a very small, 6x8 shed or something that you're trying to fit a little workbench into, then you can get really nice, neat, small benchtop lathes where you can make small things like little light pools, candle holders, little finials for things. A lot of people will do that. Pens obviously is a massive one for people, especially with all the exotic woods and things like that. And then at that point, it's just more dictated by the space you've got and the cost. The bigger you go, it just suddenly gets exponential. And obviously the bigger lathes, they need bigger chucks, and all the other bits that you brought on become more expensive. And yeah, it's just dictated by your space and how much money you want to spend on your toys, really. But they're at a very basic level, just a little benchtop lathe. I mean, I've seen them for sale in Lidl's. You wouldn't want to take on too much of one of them, but really accessible to have a quick go. Just buy one of these before you even plug it in. Like, that's the most valuable bit of equipment in the workshop, probably. Going back to that question. Definitely that lack of access to the European consumer is massive because of the customs. That plus the cost of the materials. If I'm not sourcing it myself, the raw material cost for me has more than doubled wherever I buy it. And as a result, I can't double the cost always of the piece to the customer. So I would say in the last year, I've made slightly less money on a couple of the bigger commissions where I've had to buy wood in, because the cost of that wood has been more than previous, and there's just not that much room. The customer can't afford to pay that much themselves, and it's either work or no work. So I'd say those are the two biggest things. If I want ash to work with, I can probably get that really like more than I need, because at the moment ash trees are having to be cut down, and they don't know what to do with a lot of the wood. So there's all sorts going on, but I think I just got to carry on doing my thing and hopefully it works. I read it somewhere in a forum, and I've never forgotten it. From a woodturner's perspective, if you think your chisel is starting to get blunt, it was several cuts ago. They reckon 11. So as soon as you think it's blunt, it's already going blunt. Then you need to sharpen it. As a woodturner, I spend so much time sharpening my tools. I had the luxury of working with some lignum vitae that was brought over by an admiral in the Navy in its log form in the early 1900s. And I was given it by a customer several years ago. And it's this massive log. It rings like a bell when you hit it like a hammer. It weighs more than me, and it's half the size of me. It sinks in water. It's so heavy, and they nicknamed it ironwood, I think, back in the day. And it was like cutting metal. I had to sharpen my chisel every 5 to 10 cuts, whereas, you know, a piece of cherry like that, maybe 2 or 3 times at the most in a whole bowl. I was making as many trips to the sharpener as I was to the lathe. I'm quite brutal. I just use a bench grinder because it's so quick and easy. And I'm often working with big gnarly bits of wood that will have bits of stone in them, sand in it, soil in it. And a lot of yew will have big build-ups of silica that's deposited in the grain from where it's sucked it up out of the soil. And that's what the sharpening stone is made out of. It's the same stuff. So when you cut through that, it blunts it immediately. So yeah, I'll be able, the beauty of that is it's quick. I can resharpen a chisel in less than 30 seconds and go and make some more cuts and then go back and forth. If you're making smaller, more detailed pieces, especially people like pen turners, I think, they would probably rely on a much slower speed grinder like a Tormek or something, water fed, so that it's keeping the chisel nice and cool, and you will get a superior edge. The stuff I'm working with, there's so much, half the time you're cutting air and then wood, so the chisel's bouncing around all over the place. That level of clean edge won't give you that much better a finish. It will just, you know when it's blunt, so you quickly sharpen it, basically.